Hi there, and welcome to Maddie's podcast, a show in which we discuss pressing social issues in the urban space. Today, we will be discussing the trend of how everyday objects in the urban environment, such as benches, sidewalks, and lighting, have the tendency to be designed in such a way that deter what may be deemed unsocial behavior. Particularly, we will be looking at specific real-world examples that are used to deter underhouse populations, rather termed anti-homeless architecture, and to find some insight into why these designs exist. We will look at some scholarly works on the subject as well. To begin, let's start with defining anti-homeless architecture. Many urban designs may be deemed hostile architecture, such as loud music outside of stores to deter crowd gathering, or bumps on ledges to deter skateboarders. Essentially, it's anything that shapes or inhibits certain behaviors due to holding a certain standard of what social behavior should take place in a certain space. However, anti-homeless architecture is the specific placement of designs that change or eliminate the presence of underhouse populations in a particular area. Not to say that these designs in any way eliminate homelessness, but rather just disperse the issue to other parts of the city, which we will cover in this episode. A great example of a highly thought out hostile and anti homeless architecture is the Cadman bench, the product of Cadman London Borough Council in 2012. The bench is made entirely of concrete, and the surface for sitting is slanted all over with various corners, making it quite uncomfortable to sit on. But it still maintains a modern, sleek architectural look. The design makes it an ideal for socializing, as people cannot sit comfortably side by side and to hold a long conversation, and it's also slanted quite awkwardly, so your feet have to be sat on the ground. It may be hard to sit things beside you, but besides just the modern inconvenience of it, it also can't be slept on, and it also holds components of deterring other antisocial behaviors such as skateboarding, group gatherings, and they can also even be used as barricades in civil unrest or terrorism threats. In an article on the bench, Thomas Tvari Jonas notes that although the bench is particularly harmful to homeless populations as it can't be slept on, its sleek design does not ruffle the feathers of any passerbyers, doesn't look inherently anti-homeless, there's no large spikes or anything that looks too hostile. And this invokes us to think more critically about the fact that hostile design doesn't have to appear in any way violent to do its job. Other examples of anti-sleep architecture may be armrests in the middle of benches or single-seat benches, even very thin benches that rest against the wall, such that we might see in metros or whatnot, or on the side of buildings. Robert Rosenberger, a philosopher in the field of technology, writes about anti-homeless design in his 2019 book Callous Objects: Designs Against the Homeless. Rosenberger brings up insightful points on the multi-usability aspect of anti-homeless design, bringing up examples of how a bench, for example, is a place where people may wait for buses or take a seat during their lunch break, but as well, they're used as a sleeping device at night. The deterring of sleeping is accomplished by making the device unusable for that purpose and trying to control its multiple uses. Rosenberger also brings up important philosophical points discussing how these objects are used to reduce the amount of visible space homeless people take up. That it's the work of larger social forces at play. He brings up an important aspect to discuss in that although these devices are created by engineers, designers, architects, etc., they are manufactured and distributed and installed by greater forces at play, such as local governments, park managements, and private companies, suggesting that it's not simply about where homeless people sleep, but rather pushing them to the edges of society where they can remain unseen. Rosenberger also mentions that this trend is not purely physical, but anti-homeless narratives translate into the non-physical aspects as well, such as overpolicing and racism. So it begs the question, if governments were truly concerned about the safety and well-being of people sleeping in visible parts of the city, wouldn't they be more inclined to invest more in shelters, mental health and addictions care, social workers, and housing first initiatives? In a peer-reviewed article in the publication Urban Studies, Australian scholars Naomi Smith and Peter Walters discuss how the growing trend of private commercial spaces in cities contributes to anti-homeless design. With the decrease of government investment in public space and increase in privativity, owned public space, such as malls, plazas, etc., they say there's more of an economic drive to keep the area of business attractive to potential customers. And they state that this may mean disenfranchised people or those without the ability to engage economically in these shops and spaces are dispersed and removed, and what's stopping them, because it is private property. And so, thinking about this in the real world, this may mean being able to remove someone on the basis of loitering, or private security being able to remove them or call police for trespassing. As the urban world becomes more corporatized, spaces for people lacking resources become smaller and smaller. So, where and what can we look to for solutions for this? Firstly, there needs to be more governmental support for homeless people, meaning that there will be space and inclusion for them to avoid having to look for places to sleep outside at night. As well, supporting for housing first initiatives and community support and mutual aid are both things that are quite helpful. In a more long-term sense, not to dismiss the more immediate sense for safe places to sleep, it's important for all people who work in the public sphere, such as architects, policymakers, planners, etc., to be aware and educated on anti-homeless sentiments that surround the urban space and the fields they're in, and for governments to consider the ways in which private spaces in cities are allowed to operate in their private policing of spaces. Anti-homeless design is an issue much larger than any one example and is rooted in the ever-growing anti-homeless narrative of today's world. Thanks for listening to today's podcast episode, and I do apologize I have lost my voice. But thank you. Bye for now.